to have PPK in from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I don't know if it's working at all or not. We can dump this later, I guess. How many people have ever been to corksmoke.org and solved the bug? Thanks to the work he's done for us.
Thanks.
Lately, he's been working on setting up a guild of front-end engineers and helping to articulate and educate about what it means to be a professional front-end engineer and how to kind of raise the level of all the work we do. So we're going to hear a little bit about that today. And,
yes, definitely.
Let's turn it over to the man that needs no introduction.
Yeah. Thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, I'm Peter Paul Koch. I usually go by the name of PPK. That's a branding issue, so you can call me PPK. Although most of you know me for my JavaScript work, I'm not going to talk about JavaScript at all today. Instead, I'm going to talk about certain organizational issues that have also faced Yahoo, if I understand Nate correctly. Basically, what it's all about is front-end developers, as I call it, front-end engineers, as you call it, as a separate discipline. I started working on the web back in 1998, and I was pretty lucky then, because I came into a small team of just 3 people, me included, who were really working on what's called now front-end developing. This was back in 98, you know, Netscape 3, Internet Explorer 3. Who of you ever worked with Internet Explorer 3? Okay, quite a few. Oh, good. Well, you remember how it was back then? Lots of tables in tables, lots of tables in tables in tables. In any case, what I learned there, and I realized that only now, what I learned there was a kind of pride in being a front-end developer. I mean, it was my job to make sure that the design the designers made would show up correctly in all browsers, would show up perfectly in all browsers, because back then I was working for a small design company. Well, I left the design company, I was only an intern there, and then I went to a larger website creation company, which grew to be the second largest of Holland, back in the internet boom, about 200 employees at the top. And well, I started there as a front-end programmer, or client-side programmer, as I called it back then. And pretty soon I started to notice that there were many front-end people in the company, but they weren't all on the same level when it came to technical proficiency. And at the end of '99, I had a talk with my bosses who decided they needed someone to head the front-end development team, and they asked me to do it. And I did so. Basically what happened is that I got a lot of insight into the problems front-end engineering had back then. I also found out that I'm not a manager at all. I absolutely hated managing, so that was part of the problem back then. But in any case, what I wanted to instill into the company was a kind of understanding that front-end engineering is a separate discipline. And back in 1999, I don't think many people had that idea. Who of you have worked in a smaller website creation company as a front-end engineer? Who of you in the company you worked for formed a separate front-end development team that was completely separate from both design and back-end programming? Only 2 or 3 of you. Well, that was the problem. Back then it was thought that HTML is simple, you know, HTML, that's something anyone can do. So we'll give the junior designer, we'll give him a copy of Go Live or PageMill or whatever, and he can just make a website, it's no problem. And then in other companies they said, oh, it's so simple, the junior backend programmer can do it. You know, he does PHP, so he understands about tags and stuff. And JavaScript is kind of programming language, so he can do that easily. Those were the 2 main things right then. Front-end engineering, front-end developing was kind of squeezed in between design on one hand and back-end programming on the other hand. And I'm glad to say that I could change that a little bit within the company I worked for. But it didn't last. First of all, I left myself. Secondly, as I said, I'm a lousy manager, so I could explain technical issues to other people, but I couldn't kind of make it a real team. And then I went freelance. I forgot all about this, and I thought, well, I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to skip tables and use CSS everywhere. Well, you know. That was basically it until, say, February of this year. when I talked to a few people who worked with the larger web development companies in Amsterdam, and some of them turned out to try the same thing as I tried back in '99. They tried and they succeeded in creating a separate front-end development team. Separate from design, separate from backend. Well, that's pretty interesting, and it's also pretty interesting in how they did it, but that's not exactly what I'm going to talk about. Instead, I'm going to talk about an idea I had in late March, a guild of front-end developers in Holland. I was at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and I had a lot of interesting talks with a lot of interesting people, and I kind of decided that something had to happen. Front-end development, well, here at Yahoo you're very lucky because front-end development has been recognized as a separate discipline for at least a few years, I think. But that's not the case everywhere. And besides, most people who aren't front-enders, most clients, graphic designers, interaction designers, maybe even some back-end programmers, they can't see what makes a good front-ender. And I wanted to change that. So I started to talk with a few key people in Amsterdam about founding a guild of front-end developers. And the response was overwhelming. That's a theme we'll discuss later on. But it's really incredible. I just phoned a few people. I mean, I could say, hi, I'm PPK from Quirks Mode. Oh yeah, oh, whoa, great to talk to you. And that was, of course, a big help. But everybody I talked to was enthusiastic about it. So pretty soon we had a few meetings, first pretty informal, later slightly more formal, with about 50 to 60 professional front-end developers from all kinds of companies. And well, the conclusion was that we need a guild of front-end developers. And today I want to talk about a few conclusions we've drawn until now. The process is still going on. I mean, we exist only since last Tuesday, officially, because then all the acts and stuff was signed. But, well, there are a few ideas I'd like to discuss with you. And later on, of course, I want to hear your opinion on all this. Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? I hope to talk for, well, 20, 25 minutes on my presentation, and then we'll have a kind of open discussion. Anyway, what are the purposes of the Guild of Front-End Developers, called Fronteers? Well, the professionalization of front-end developers is obviously the most important purpose. And professionalization kind of splits up into several things. First of all, we have to give clients a chance to distinguish good front-end programmers from bad. Because there are too many people out there who kind of make websites and they kind of look nice, but once you look into the code, it's a horrible mess. And clients usually don't have a clue about good and bad coding. The clients I'm especially thinking about is the government in Holland, especially the ministries. I'll get back to that later. Secondly, I want to make clear what a good front-end developer needs to know. Because there are, as I said, there are plenty of people who don't really get it, who still work with tables, and okay, they use CSS for the colors and the background colors, and maybe a background image, but that's about it. And the question I often get is, okay, but what exactly do I need to know as a good front-end programmer? Yeah, it's a tricky question. I just talked to Nate about it, and he came to 672 separate areas of knowledge that you really have to know. Well, I'm trying to kind of restrict it into 5. We'll talk about these 5 in a little while. But in any case, if I want to say you are a bad front-end programmer, I have to say why you are a bad front-end programmer. You are a good front-end programmer. Why are you a good front-end programmer? That's very important. Currently, we're still working on this list. I mean, I'm not going to talk about what exactly makes a good front-end programmer, but I do want to say that we need some sort of list. And finally, well, we've got skill swaps, networking, etc. We've got, I'm trying to organize meetings and stuff, local meetings for just, say, 20 to 60 people. Well, that has been going on for quite a while now, of course, but it's the more formal, more organizational superstructure that I really want to talk about today. And I'd like to start talking about the target audience a bit, which I hope will make you understand why we need a more formal approach than just a meeting, just a skill swap. My target audience in this order is First, the large website creation companies, and only second, the small companies and freelancers. Now, why did I do that? Oh, wait a minute. First, my definition. Large website creation companies are companies whose core business is the creation of websites for others. So Yahoo is not a large website creation company, in my definition, and who employ at least 25 people. Could also be 30, 35, I don't know. We have to name a number. Why exactly do I want those large website creation companies? Back in early this year, I did a lot of thinking about the nature of the web standards movement until now. And my main conclusion was that large website creation companies don't really need the web standards movement. They need web standards, of course, because their front-end programmers have to do the best job they can. So that, well, of course they use web standards, but they don't need a movement as such. The web standards movement started, say, back in 98, 99, and mostly consisted of people from small companies, freelancers, and also universities and other institutions. And the reason for that was that especially small companies and freelancers wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to be distinguished from all the other small companies and freelancers by creating good tutorials, by writing articles, by going to conferences, by speaking at conferences, writing books, etc., etc. That was extremely important for small companies and freelancers. I myself am a freelancer. I made a great website, and it netted me quite a few clients. But the whole idea behind the web standards movement was that people from small companies and freelancers did the actual work to make a name for themselves, so that other people would recognize them, give them jobs, etc. People from large website creation companies don't need that. They have nice clients and interesting clients. They have an excellent team to work in, especially when front-end developing is recognized as a separate discipline. And they don't really need to write articles and stuff. They are happy as it is. In fact, when I was working on the Guild, I talked to one guy who was a lead front-end programmer in one company, and he kind of apologized for it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I work with web standards and I like it a lot, but I don't really write about it. When I go home and I forget about my job. And that's something you see more with large website companies than with small companies and freelancers. Anyway, my idea was to kind of include the large companies into my plans because, well, they weren't reached as yet. I mean, they were reached by the web standards themselves, but they didn't talk about it. I mean, I went to a lot of sites of local website creation agencies, and most of those sites were still table-based. And, that's of course because they have been created somewhere in 2000, 2001, never updated. Well, you know how that goes. Then I started to study their portfolios and their job openings, and I thought, hey, wait a minute, they do know what they're talking about. They do know what they're doing. They use CSS in all the right ways. In their job openings, CSS is absolutely mandatory for any front-end developer. So why don't they talk about it? And that's one of the ideas I got. Large website creation companies have to start talking about using web standards. They have to start being proud of using web standards. Now, Yahoo already does that, I know, but it's more about the average website creation company just has to say, okay, I use web standards because they're good, because I need them, because it's the way things should work. That's why, especially at the start, I concentrated on the large website companies, and it went absolutely overwhelming. I mean, within a couple of days, I had about 50 people gathered in a room like this, who were all, or most of them, were from large website creation companies, and they all said, oh, your idea is so great, we're absolutely going to help with the Guild. So that took care of the large website creation companies far, far faster than I'd expected. And what about the small companies and freelancers? Of course, we need them. There are probably more freelancers, freelance front-end developers in the world than people who work for large website creation companies. They also came in. They also reacted to it. And basically, I was very worried about the target audience when I started organizing this, but it turned out not to be necessary. I mean, both the large companies and the freelancers are all, are all in now, and they are working together now. But I think that the large website companies mostly came in because my proposal was a more formal, more organized structure than just a meeting, just a collaborative community online. And I think that's something to keep in mind. You need something above just an online community to attract the large companies. Anyway, I also wrote an article on a list apart about the difference between large and small companies. I'm not going to go into that, you can read it online. Apart from the web companies themselves, who support us? Again, I was amazed at the level of support I got. Well, the large companies were in, not only the front-end developers themselves, but also the management. It was only after 1 or 2 months at most that one guy came to me and said, hey, I'm a manager from this and that company, and I'm also the chairman of the organization of large web companies in Holland, and we think your idea is absolutely great, and we definitely want to help you. And we can also offer you a bit of money to organize your first conference. And I said, yeah, sure, give me the money, no problem. And that was when the large companies came in, the large companies as organizations, not individual employees of large companies. Secondly, and I counted on that a bit, the government as a client. We'll get back to the government in a little bit. The government is very interested in web standards at the moment, and their complaint was also, yeah, we want web standards, but we don't know which front-end programmers can use web standards and which cannot. In any case, they supported us from the outset. That is certain key people within the government, all strictly informal. I mean, there will never be any formal declaration that the Guild of Front-End Programmers will be the most important thing, but it's just that key people in the government support us. And finally, very important, few teachers. And we're still working on that. There's an education committee that's doing great work right now, and we're trying to contact a few key people within universities so that they can start teaching the right way of making websites. Now, I need to give a bit of background here. The web guidelines of the Dutch government. It was back in 2001 that I met a certain guy who worked for the government, and he surprised me because he knew about web standards. We could talk about duck type declarations back then, back in 2001, right? And not a professional front-end programmer, but just a guy from government who happens to work with websites. And he was the one who kind of started the initiative to make web guidelines for the Dutch government. These web guidelines encourage accessibility, durability, and findability of government material because, obviously, government material has to be accessible to all, also to the blind, etc., etc. The web guidelines are based on the W3C specs, WCAG, and also on best practices that have grown within the international front-end community. I'm going to give you a slight idea of what we're talking about. Can you read this, or shall I make it larger? I'll make it slightly larger. It's not really surprising for a professional front-end programmer, but it's good that there's a list of these things. Well, keeps structure and design separate. Progressive enhancement, well, that has been mistranslated, unfortunately, but this really means progressive enhancement. Don't make the functioning of website dependent on optional technologies, such as CSS client-side scripting, etc., etc., etc. Do not use frames. Use ECMAScript if client-side scripting is used at all. And here is descriptive Markov, emphasis, abbreviation, definition, well, etc., etc. 125 web guidelines which incorporate and encompass best practices that have grown up in our community. This is more or less official. It's not exactly a law. But the national ministries in Holland have voluntarily agreed to comply with the web standards before 2010. And they are, officially they're just an advisory body of rules, but we expect all kind of government branches to start supporting them in the next few years. I mean, government works slow, of course, so if we look in 2012, 2013, there will certainly be some government sites that don't comply to the web guidelines yet. But we expect most of them to follow it. The EU, the European Union, might be interested in pulling this to a higher level. The EU works very, very slowly, so it will take years and years and years and years and years and years before something actually happens, but they might be interested. And in practice, I noticed many financial institutions, banks and such, and insurers already follow similar protocols, because banks want all their transactions to enabled online, and that also means transactions for the blind and for other disabled people. So that's the web guidelines, but there's one problem with it. Oh, come on. Implementing them assumes there are enough good front-end developers. And right now, hey, they aren't there. And besides, clients, in this case government agencies, need a way of separating good from bad front-end programmers. And that's when I came up with the idea of a certain kind of certification. Basically, what we want to do is certify people to say, yeah, you can do excellent HTML, CSS, but your JavaScript still needs a bit of work, or you are an excellent Flash programmer, but you don't understand semantic HTML, whatever. In any case, we want to have some kind of semi-official paper that you can show to prospective clients. We want to have some sort of list on our website eventually that will allow people to find out whether company X employs good front-end programmers. These are the 5 areas I talked about a little while earlier. We want, basically, the idea right now is to certify people in use of HTML, semantics, obviously, CSS, JavaScript, Flash, and context. And context is a bit vague still. We're still working on the definition of that. But it will mean a bit of graphic design, interaction design, database programming, and stuff like that. Things that are not actually the core business of a front-end programmer, but that you have to know something about. We're definitely going to use an oral personal exam. People have to come in and sit down and answer a few questions, a few theoretical questions about, say, CSS. What's the use of position relative, something like that. And apart from that, we're going to look at some sites they recently made and ask them about that. And the idea is not so much as them giving the correct answers, because especially in CSS development, there aren't any correct answers. There are just 255 ways of doing one thing. And what you need as a front-end programmer is to explain why you use a certain solution to a certain problem. If you use a 3-column layout, say you float the 3 columns, you have to explain why you use float. If you use position absolute, that's fine too, but explain why you use position absolute. And it's this talk that pretty quickly will allow us to see whether you're a good front-end programmer or not, I hope. And clients, especially the government, will eventually pay attention to this certification. Now, this is still in progress. So don't expect anything to happen for the next 6 months at least. We've got a certification committee that's right now looking into producing a kind of test exams. And we'll start using these test exams in a little while. But the exact status of the certification is still uncertain. Do we have to use it informally? That is, we just publish the results of our certification on our website, or do we need a more formal approach with accreditation and all kinds of complicated things, bureaucratic things? We're not sure yet. We're starting up right now, but we've decided not yet to publish any results because it's too much in a test phase right now. But of course, eventually the results will have to go public, because otherwise our certification is completely useless. So that's, I think, the main idea about the guild. We need some way of distinguishing good from bad front-end programmers, and certification is one way of doing that. Not the only way, one way. Yeah, this is less interesting. We also need lots of meetings, of course, networking, get to know each other, skill swaps. And I want individual guild members to organize meetings in their own towns. I mean, I'm not going to become a kind of organization guy who makes sure that every 2 weeks there's a meeting somewhere in Holland. It's a bit own initiative of individual guild members. And we have a bit of a budget to support that. Okay, and what do we have to do next? Personally, to me, persuading the large companies to openly declare they're working with web standards is very important. I want, in say 3 or 4 years, that all major website creation companies in Holland have some sort of statement on their site that they are working with web standards. Because that will mean that anyone who is serious about going into front-end programming will understand that there's something to learn. That if you know Dreamweaver, that it's not quite enough to become a professional front-end programmer. And of course, we get back to the skill list we as a guild have to make. What exactly do you have to know? I'm not sure right now. We have to organize conferences, training sessions and such. Well, that's already being done, not necessarily by the guild, but we are going to try to organize that too. And then education. Right now, the multimedia studies in Holland have little to do with everyday reality. I'm not sure how the situation in the US is. Who of you followed a more or less official course in front-end programming or whatever they called it at the university or college? Anyone? One. It's not too many. Was it good? Thank you. That's exactly the point I wanted to make. Most official studies are terrible because the teachers mostly came in during the first internet hype, say 97, 98, 99. They understood what front-end developing was about back then. Tables, tables and tables, tables and tables and tables. And they've never learned much until now. So we're working on that right now. Fortunately, we've got a former teacher who heads the committee for education. It will take quite a while before we have some actual results to show, but we're working on that. Well, we have to get some press interest. We already have that in local Dutch specialized magazines. This is also an interesting one, harmonized job titles. What is a web designer? What is a web developer? What's a web producer? I don't know if anyone of you saw the Listapart survey results, which came in Tuesday or Wednesday. And they asked everybody, okay, what's your job title? And I don't have the faintest idea what a web producer, how a web producer differs from a web developer. I'm not sure, I suppose here at Yahoo you have a kind of organized title system or something. More or less. Okay. Well, anyway, that's something the large web companies themselves are also working on, and well, we're going to give them a hand. That basically was what I had to say, and I'd like to ask you for feedback. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this is a terrible idea? So.
I'm a member of the web guild accessible web.
Yes.
Right now they're in the process of sort of a reorg.
Okay, not much, to be frank. I know of the existence of the guild, but that's about it. Fortunately, one of our members is also a member of that guild, but we'll still have to look into it. I mean, my personal idea was, let's find out what we front-enders want before having any alliance or stuff with, or borrowing stuff from other organizations. So, I'm not sure. We'll definitely have a look at a later stage, but first we have to find out what do we want.